So as we look at this passage, these first few verses of Luke 9, I want to start by kind of giving you a bit of a confession and window into a sickness that I have. When I watch television, I actually need like a sponsor to watch with me, because when a commercial comes on and they start advertising something, there's something inside me that says, I must have that. And so even when I'm channel surfing, if I get to that shopping network, it's a long pause, a very long pause, and I have tools and weight loss equipment and formulas. I was able to say no to the clapper, but I even bought a food dehydrator. I don't know why I wanted to take the hydration out of fruit, but I needed one. And I've gone to the Puyallup Fair, and in my garage I have a folding ladder that I had no idea I was going to buy before I went to the fair. I have water filters and amazing water-saving shower heads, and even a Vitamix mixer, all thanks to just walking with no sales resistance through booths. And so I need a sponsor to help me go through those things. Hi, my name's Bill, and I'm a shopper. And so I kind of need that kind of support. But what's amazing to me is it seems like we all need that kind of support, because we're apt to fall for all kinds of things, whether it happens to be because we have become media dependent, or whether we have become marketeered. I don't know exactly what it is. And some of the things that seem to come as scams, whether they happen to be things like cults that have arisen in our own country, in our own time. To me, the most bizarre cult that has arisen and got some kind of notoriety was in 1997, when Marshall Applegate led a group called Heaven's Gate. And they rented a really nice house in an affluent part of San Diego. And in March of that year, the police came and found 39 bodies who had all committed suicide together. They wore the same shoes, the same pants, the same shirt. They were basically in uniforms. Each one of them had in their pocket an ID card. They all had a packed bag ready to go. And as you listen to a couple of the tapes from their leader, you realize that his fundamental idea or belief was that they were kind of like from an away team, aliens who had been sent to Earth and had inhabited human bodies, and they were waiting for their kind of beam me up Scotty call. And when the Hale-Bopp comet appeared, they knew that that was their team having come to take them home. So they all committed suicide together and were gone. I'm not sure I would have needed a sponsor for that one. I think I could have said, no, not going there. But there was a guy in the 70s named Jim Jones who led a group called People's Temple. And it started in San Francisco. They started a campus in Los Angeles. During that time, they grew to over 8,000 members. He was a respectable religious leader in his town. He was asked to serve on civil rights activist groups. The governor and mayor attended his church upon occasion. Senators had recognized him and said that he was doing a great job. At some point in the spinning out of his group, he took 1,000 people and they moved to British Guiana. While they were there, people started to write to congressmen and senators saying, I want out. And so a Senate investigation team with reporters went down to look at it. Jim Jones announced that there were outsiders and kind of spread a certain element of fear to the place that when the senators and reporters were starting to get back to their plane, they opened fire on them and shot them. Only a few survived or escaped. And so during that time, he said, the end has come. They're coming to destroy our family. And between volunteer drinking Kool-Aid that was laced with cyanide and people who were forced or shot and 250 children that were injected with cyanide, over 1,000 people died in the name of following a man and a religion. Now, it isn't just tragedy, and it isn't just weird stuff that we are sometimes inclined to buy into. There's the proverbial motivational speaker who's willing to tell you how if you will just buy his tips and his tricks, that you too can be a millionaire. And people who are desperate and don't have discretionary income usually charge the amount, somewhere between $3,500 and $7,500, and they go, it didn't work for me, and the motivational speaker goes, it's still working for me. And somehow they don't connect the dots, or we don't connect the dots. I read about internet romances this week of men who were communicating to women in other countries. And they found themselves waiting at airports with balloons and bears as planes emptied, and their would-be life partner didn't get off the plane, and they found themselves with tickets that they purchased for $2,500 or so, and bonds that they'd had to post for employment or financial security reasons had been cashed, and that here they are, brokenhearted and $10,000 lighter, by somebody who's probably doing that to person to person to person around the world. Even parenting becomes a marketing scheme. There are several parenting classes that you can buy, or discs and CDs that you can buy that give you ideas. One of them that I looked at had these 5 simple, effective steps for parenting. Smile, take a break, don't be confrontational, plan your responses and make them your emotional toolkit, and be open-minded. And I thought, really, somebody, okay, who am I? I had to fight saying no to the clapper, but I couldn't believe that people actually, bought that parenting class, because I thought, let me just kind of run a couple of different ideas through that. Someone's having a temper tantrum, and I say, okay, Johnny, it's okay. Not that I'm making any judgments. I'm going to have my own little timeout over here. I need a break. And when you get done, we'll make a list of options of how you could respond next time. Okay? Somehow I don't think that would work. He runs into the street and you go, at least he's fast. Maybe between all the cars, it'll make him into a professional athlete. We've got to look at some options. Or hitting sister with a toy in the head. Let's not do that. Sister didn't really know what she was doing. Can you think of some other creative ways? I'm smiling, and I'm not confronting, and I'm not making any judgments. Far be it from me. Sister might be at this point, but we're not making any judgment. Somehow, there's got to be a time where, you actually have a plan, and you actually step into your child's life, and there's a collision of values, and you're calling for an alignment rather than just, let's have a conference. And it seems like time after time after time, each one of us kind of gets marketed into a fear, something we don't have or something we're afraid might happen. We're going to lose a child, or we don't have this, or we can't afford water, so we get a certain shower nozzle, or we can't afford to look, or don't feel like we want to look the way we do, and so we buy something to shape our body, and on it goes, and you get the idea. But what's fascinating to me as we look at chapter 9, Jesus is calling for people to give their life and go give their life away. And it's in drastic contrast to someone who says, do something I'm not doing. In chapter 8 of Luke, where those of you who've been here for several weeks have kind of tracked with us as we're walking through the Gospel of Luke, you've seen Jesus in some interesting situations. He taught a parable where he talked about a seed that falls into the ground, or as it falls on the ground, birds snatches it. As it falls into the ground, heat scorches it. As it germinates in the ground, it gets choked by weeds. And all 3 of those are different responses to the gospel that are not fruitful. And then he talks about this one soil in which the seed falls, that when it grows, it's fruitful to 100-fold. And Jesus was presenting the picture. That really is the picture of a supernatural work being done in the heart or life of each one of us. Is that it wouldn't be futile, it wouldn't be fruitless, but it would actually bear inexplicable type growth or fruit to it. And so that's the picture Jesus was saying about what life looks like in chapter 8. From there, he calmed the storm and showed that he had power over nature. He healed a woman who had a hemorrhage, a bleeding hemorrhage for over 10 years, and he heals her, showing his power over disease. A 12-year-old girl dies, and Jesus raises her to life, showing his power over death. There's a demoniac man who has been driven from his village, forced to live among tombs, and Jesus delivers this man from a demonic oppression, showing his power over the enemy. So in chapter 8, Jesus is seen as this amazing, powerful God-man. And in chapter 9, we see him sharing his power and his authority with his disciples. So I just want to go ahead and read these verses with you, starting in chapter 9. And he called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over demons and to cure diseases. He sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. And he said to them, "Take nothing for your journey, no staff, no bag, no bread, nor money, and do not have 2 tunics. And whatever house you enter, stay there, and from there depart. And wherever they do not receive you, when you leave that town, shake off the dust from your feet as a testimony against them." And when they departed, they went through the villages, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all this that was happening, and he was perplexed, because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead, by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the prophets of old had risen. And Herod said, "John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things?" And he sought to seek him. And so as we start to look at these verses together, what I want to do is kind of look at all 3 of those sections. I want to look at what Jesus is saying. Here's how I want you to go, and here's how I want you to respond in case you're rejected. And then I want you to, and Luke says, here's how I want you to see the difference between a disciple and Herod in the whole process of what they would do with Jesus. So looking at this idea of Jesus sending the disciples, it says that he sent them with his power and with his authority. There are all kinds of distinctions or nuances between power and authority. But for Jesus, he's saying, I'm giving you the ability and I'm giving you the right to be able to defeat demons and cure diseases. Now, you can kind of get a trajectory of where we're going and understand that if you're a disciple of Jesus, if he commissioned these disciples, he's commissioned you as a disciple. And that's kind of the trajectory of where I want to go today. But in the midst of that, I would guess that if any of you are like me, you're kind of going, okay, well, if I'm going to have to own that commission, I want some of the same perks that those guys got. Give me the power over demons, give me the power over sickness, because if I could kind of walk around and there's somebody who's sick and I could touch them and they're well, somebody's just driving crazy on the freeway and I can go, be at peace. If I could just do those kinds of things, there's probably someone who's going to say, whatever he's got, I want some of that. Give me some of that. He's saying that's Jesus, then give me some of that Jesus. And it seems like it'd be very easy to connect those dots. Even in the commissioning of these disciples, where he says, I give you this power and I give you this authority. Jesus finds them, and there's a man who comes, and he says, hey, I brought my son to your disciples because he's demon-possessed, and they couldn't deliver him. And they're going, yeah, what happened with that? And they said, well, this kind of comes out with prayer. And they go, prayer? You didn't tell us prayer. You told us you gave us power and authority. We're just kind of doing this, and they're not doing nothing. And do you kind of get the idea that perhaps if Jesus were to say to you, if you want to be my follower, fill out this card, put it in the mail, and you'll get a follower suit. And it comes in the mail, you open the box, you put on, the tights and the capes on the back, and it has a little D for disciple. And when people are, kind of going crazy, you just be healed, and boom, they're good. People are sick, and you're saying, be whole, and they're healed. And you're going, this is working. I mean, it wouldn't take long before I would be saying, I'm not a follower of Christ. I've got my own gig going on here. And Jesus is saying, I'm not kind of empowering you to build your kingdom. I'm inviting you to build my kingdom. I'm not giving you your own little franchise called power. I'm sharing with you my power. And you're going to do things in my authority. And that's really what Jesus is telegraphing to his disciples. And so that they'll get it, he gives them a do not bring to camp list. I don't know if you've ever gone to a camp, but usually here's what you're supposed to bring, like sleeping bag, toothbrush, that kind of thing, and here's what you're not supposed to bring, knives and guns, and and on the list goes. Well, the not to bring to camp list for Jesus is no staff, no bag, no bread, no money. Now, those seem like good things to bring. A staff represents either the idea of someone who's leading with authority or somebody who's got a rod to protect. The whole idea of a bag can mean something as simple as what I carry my money in, although he's going to say no money later on. It can include weights and measures for when you're trading and selling. It could include the things that you're going to barter with. But it does represent some kind of resource kit that you're bringing in this bag. He's saying, yeah, I don't want you to bring that. I don't want you to bring bread. There's over 200 times in the Bible where bread is simply mentioned kind of as a livelihood of people. Man shall not live by bread alone. They were in house to house breaking bread with one another. The picture of bread really gives us the picture that in that Middle East biblical time, it wasn't meat and it wasn't vegetable. That was kind of like the stock or the center of the dietary plan or the sustenance. It was bread. And he's saying, I don't even want you to take what would sustain you. And he goes, and in case you're saying, well, okay, I don't need any of that as long as they have money. He's saying, no money. So there's no money, no bag, no rod, nothing going with them, and there's no ATM along the way. I mean, they are stuck. What's interesting is there was a group of people a couple of thousand years before Jesus sent these guys out who were sent out. Only they didn't know they were being sent out. They simply thought they were being freed. And that was a people called Israel. And when they were set free from Egypt, from slavery, the people of Egypt were so glad to get rid of them after the plagues that they basically said, here, take whatever you want. And they walked out with earrings and jewelry and gold reserves. They walked out with clothes and pottery and all kinds of things. And it's like they had looted Egypt without ever having gone to war. And they thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And it didn't take them long before the first time they spent some of their reserve was on making a false god called a golden calf. And so some of their wealth got pillaged just by worshiping the wrong thing. And God said, just for fun, why don't we grind that up and you can eat it? So you'll realize that it isn't even the gold I'm after you. A couple months go into the situation and God says, now we're going to build a tabernacle, and it's going to be a portable place of worship. And we're going to need curtains, and we're going to need gold to be able to put together the rods and the altars and the basins and all that. And all of a sudden, the rest of what they needed was collected, and these people found themselves with nothing. They had no food, so God had to start having food fall from the air every day. It was called manna, which, if we literally translated it, means, what is it? So for 40 days, people ate, what is it? And for 40 years, and for 40 years, their clothes didn't wear out. Their shoes didn't wear out. For some of you, that'd really be bad news, wouldn't it? I mean, like there are times where I go, good, my shoes are wearing out. It's time for a new pair. Every once in a while I get discouraged. I go, this was a good purchase. Shoot. I kind of wanted them to wear out. These shoes didn't wear out. God was sustaining them day by day, meal by meal, need by need. But they thought they were being delivered, and God was intending for them to be deployed. They were supposed to be the salt and the light to the earth as they were the people of God set free, living out Jesus. And they huddled in. And here's Jesus saying to the 12, I don't want you to huddle in. And in chapter 10, he's going to send out 72 saying, I don't want you to be an inner circle with an outer circle, with an outer circle, with an outer circle. I want you to go. So much different than someone who manipulates you into buying or belonging by saying, out there scary, come in here and it's safe. Jesus is saying, it's scary everywhere. You come in here, I'm going to change your life. You go out there, they're going to reject you. It's scary. So you need a God. You don't need something instead of God. You need God. So you don't need a bag, and you don't need a rod, and you don't need bread, and you don't need a second tunic. You need me. And so I'm sending you out to depend on me. And that, in essence, is where each of us needs to understand that as we would trust in God, we don't simply do the thing of God, we actually reflect what God wanted the thing to do. God hasn't sent us on a mission because he couldn't do it any other way. He sent us on a mission because he loves to share and he wants you to be changed even more. Okay? From simply being somebody who gets to somebody who gives. That's God's plan for each one of us. So, He says, well, here's what happens as you get deployed. It's not always going to be an acceptance and acceptance and acceptance. In verse 4 it says, in whatever house you enter, stay there, and from there depart. Whenever they do not receive you, when you leave that town, shake off the dust from your feet as a testimony against them. And they departed and went through the villages, preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. So, a couple things. One is, as they were healing everywhere, and preaching everywhere, you start to realize they didn't simply gather a crowd and speak to a crowd. When they were in the marketplace, they were talking to the people in line. They were talking to the person who was selling. When they were walking to a place, if there were other people on the road, they were talking to people on the road. When they were staying with somebody in their home, they were talking to somebody in the home that they were staying in. Their talking about Jesus became a lifestyle, not something they did and then they were off and then they were on and then they were off. It's who they were. See, we have a tendency sometimes to think that we witness for Jesus or we do evangelism. And when we talk like that, we make presenting the gospel a verb. And the scriptures paint the picture that we are the gospel embodied. We are the message of Christ to be lived out in front of people. That we are a noun called the gospel, not a verb called the gospel. That we are living stones, we are living epistles, that we are how people are supposed to connect the dots between who Jesus is and what he said. So, I tell you that. Go and present the gospel. And if you're like me, I kind of want to go back to that thing. I'll do that as soon as Jesus gives me that power and authority thing. The demon thing, the disease thing, gives me those, I'm good to go. But Jesus tells this story about a beggar named Lazarus and a rich man, and that their traffic pattern intersected regularly. And then they died. And Lazarus, this beggar, is in a place called paradise, and the rich man is in a place of torment. And there's this chasm that's inseparable between the two, so that there can't be any kind of bridging back and forth. And yet, as Jesus tells this story, he says that the rich man is in such torment that he looks over and sees the beggar and he says, could you just dip your finger in water and put it on my tongue? And he goes, I can't get across the chasm. And he goes, well, then could you at least go back and warn my brothers? I have 5 of them. Could you go warn them so that they don't end up with the same kind of torment? And when Jesus is telling the story, it's really interesting because he says, if they have Moses and they won't believe him, then they're not even going to believe somebody if they raised from the dead. Okay, now just kind of think about that for a minute, because I don't know if you've ever mounted up a campaign to read the Bible in a year. January, I'm usually pretty excited about that, and I read Genesis, and it's got some good stories, and it's 50 chapters, and I can get my way through that. Then I'm in Exodus, I'm going, okay, that was pretty good, and I get to Numbers, and I'm going, you are kidding me, how long is this going to take? All year? And Numbers just kind of like shuts the whole excitement party down, you know? So when Jesus is saying, if they have numbers, or they see somebody raised from the dead, they're not going to believe the raised from the dead if they won't believe numbers. I'm going, really? Numbers? Dude who falls down dead and raises from the dead? I'll take that. I will bank on that being something I would believe. And Jesus is saying, that's because you think you can handle the toggle switch. And Jesus said, it's an act of God on someone's heart. And people are constantly hardening their heart, constantly looking for ways to be the God rather than serve God, constantly looking for ways to let God be part of their story rather than accepting the invitation to be in His. So I want to read the last few verses of this passage. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was happening, and he was perplexed, because it was said by some that John had raised from the dead, but some that Elijah had appeared, and others that the one of the prophets of old had risen. And Herod said, John I have beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he sought to seek him. And so the picture is, Herod is curious. But curiosity seems like a very biblical response to hearing about Jesus. In chapter 8, Jesus calms a storm, and the disciples go, who is he? Who is this guy who calms storms? Constantly, people are saying, who are you that you have such authority? Who told you you could teach like that? What are you doing here in the temple? And constantly, there's a curiosity. And that curiosity puts us in conflict or disequilibrium, so we're off balance. Because what we thought was the truth clashes with what we're hearing or seeing about Jesus, and we don't know how to reconcile the two. And I'm pretty convinced that when we go from this curiosity that causes this conflict, that to solve the conflict, we usually drop into one of three categories. The first one is a combatant, somebody who refuses to adjust or change or believe the new information, and so kind of goes with either what they were believing or makes up a storyline so that this doesn't have to rule or integrate into life. And Herod is that combatant. He's curious about Jesus. He's going to see and hear Jesus, and Jesus doesn't do one miracle in front of him. Here's Jesus sending out the disciples saying, you have the ability to do miracles. And when Jesus' own life is at risk, and Herod had brought him in, and it says in the gospel narrative, hoping to see a miracle, and Jesus doesn't do one for him. Herod galvanizes as a combatant and says, there's no way I am just taking somebody to believe in. If I can't get something from him, or he can't show me that I need to surrender because he's got more power than me, then I'm staying on my mission with my life, with my kingdom. And he became a combatant. What's interesting to me is how many people want to be polite combatants. Just, it's okay for you, but it's not for me. There's no way you can politely reject the God of the universe. You can't simply say, I'm sorry, God. I know you did a lot of work. I mean, just in and of itself, this is a miracle that you preserved something for so long and made it so accurate and fulfilled so many prophecies. That's really amazing, but I don't buy it. But can we still be friends? And like at the end, could you just kind of put all my good and all my bad and hope that I weigh out? Could we just go there? And God's saying, no. God is saying, if you're not going to buy my story, it doesn't make it true or not. Just read the story and figure out where you fit, not read the story and figure out if it fits. To the extent that you figure out that it doesn't fit your life, you're a combatant. So there's a second way of people saying, well, that just sounds too harsh and too anti-everything. I would just like to be more like a hybrid, where I can just kind of put both together. Some of my stuff, some of God's stuff. So I like the idea that God's loving, that's cool, and I love the idea that there's a heaven, that's great, and I love the idea that God is going to come back for me, that's all good stuff. And I like the idea that I have a future and a career and some stuff on earth, and so if we could just all put this together, in fact, if believing in God could get me more stuff and a better career, even better. And so I'll just kind of put that together, and it's not combatant, but it is kind of like consumerism. It becomes very much like a religion. Basically, religion is a churchy way of saying Aladdin's lamp. It's a way of saying, if I pray or if I read my Bible or whatever I do, I can rub the lamp in such a way that the Jesus appears and says, I will give you 3 wishes. And you can even ask for more. And we treat Jesus way more like a genie than like he's the Lord. And we would say, what is it you wish from me? And so that consumer piece somehow doesn't think they're combatant, though they oppose everything that the kingdom of God declares. And feels way more like some of the scam artists, or way more like somebody who is promising that something that you absolutely need, and so you buy it out of fear, or you buy it out of greed, rather than surrender to Jesus because he's real. And that third bucket is that we would respond to Jesus convinced that he is who he said he is, and that we are who he said we are, and we follow him. And as followers, then he basically commissions us as disciples. And so we usually live life either as a combatant or a consumer or as commissioned. And those really do kind of become the streams that we live in. So I'm going to tell you a story of something that a lady just told me after the 9 o'clock. She came up about a month ago, and she said to me, my mom is an atheist. She's angry at life and angry at God. She's 87. And she doesn't have much time, but she won't talk to me about Jesus. What do I do? And look at me. I said, ask me over for lunch. So I went over to her house for lunch, and her mom's there, and her mom goes, so why are you here? And I said, I'm here to be your friend. And she said, I thought you were here to talk to me about God. I go, well, friends talk to each other about God. And she's going, this guy's tricky. So we talked for a while, and I really didn't think I had made a lot of headway. She said that I said, when you look outside, do you just think that happened? She goes, what do you mean? And I took off my watch, and I said, well, okay, my watch has a rubber watch band to it. It's got a computer on board. I said, do you think we could just kind of put this in a paper bag, break it up, and shake it enough time? I mean, even if we could shake it for 10, 12 million years, you think it's ever going to come back to being that watch? She goes, it could. I'm going, wow. So I'm going, then why couldn't there be a God? She's kind of, okay, I'll give you that one too. You are a tricky guy. And so I left, and I just figured that was, it. And I was just kind of talking to her about God, and that's the end of the thing. And this lady came up to me today, and she said, on Tuesday of this week, my mom was just walking in the kitchen, and she screamed out, I am a sinner. And this lady's crying. She goes, my mom experienced God's grace. And she said, my mom said, why would Jesus want an 87-year-old woman? And this lady said, I told her, Mom, he's a lot older than you. To him, you're still his little girl. You know? But she became a Christian. It's just awesome. You know? And that lady lived for 87 years as a combatant and is now commissioned. So if you find yourself today at a place where you are curious, that's good. Maybe if you find yourself off balance, that's good, but curious and off balance are not a fixed place. And if you have been curious for a long time, you're not curious. You're politely combatant. If you have been off balance for a long time, you've gained your balance, and you're politely combatant. I want to invite you to get back into the game. If an 87-year-old woman realizes that her static position can be made alive again, all of us need to understand that. For others of you, the whole idea of being a consumer, and you've tried to put you and Jesus together rather than Jesus gets to be the referee that says that's out of bounds, that belongs, your mind, come here, put that away, what goes, what stays, what needs to be added. If he's not the one calling that shot, I want to invite you to surrender rather than integrate and be the one that's in control. And for those of you who are convinced, I just want to reiterate, then you have been commissioned. You don't get to be convinced and not go. We're all sent because God is a sent and sending God. And we are a sent and sending people. So each one of us, when we leave here today, are sent. So as we kind of land this plane and come to a place of getting ready to have communion, this represents Jesus' body broken for our sin. Jesus' blood shed for our sin. He has done the war deed that we might know peace. We don't have to stay combatants. He has paid the price, not so that you'll be a consumer, but so that you could be owned by the God of the universe. He has the power and authority to send you out. What's amazing is that your words, when you use God's words, have as much power as if somebody would raise from the dead in front of them. Jesus invites us to tell his story and let him do work in people's lives so they can go from curious to conflicted to convinced to commissioned. So if that's not your story, I want to invite you to spend some time up here with people and ask your questions, work through your stick points, or recommit. If it is your story, I want to invite you to come to the table, and I want you to be somebody who could say to Jesus, Jesus, I don't want to live in my comfort zone. I want to live in the world commissioned by you, without a rod, without bread, without a bag, without a second tunic. I believe you're enough. So let me pray that that could be our experience. Heavenly Father, thank you that you rule and you reign, and that Jesus is King, and we get to be part of his kingdom and announce it to others. And I pray, God, that we would find ourselves at lunch tables, in neighborhoods, in family, at barbecues. We'd find ourselves at work. We'd find ourselves living life, and everywhere we are, that Jesus comes out and people are curious. That as Jesus gets talked about, people find themselves conflicted. and as Jesus does the work in their heart, that they find themselves convinced as we're obedient to our commission. So, Father, work in our lives as a church and in each heart today, in Jesus' name. Amen.